right? And I'm having this conversation about queerness and occupying spaces as political beings. Let me introduce you to a platform. My name is Mr. and this is my platform, Gaze, Freedom and the Right to Be. So, a stance has been taken, and it's either you're for it or you're against it. This is something that was said as part of the feedback from the last episode. Hi, my name is Mosimane Khape, and this is Gaze, Freedom and the Right to Exist. Please like, share and subscribe, and just interact with the content on the comment section. Also just share with the vast majority of your friends. Thank you so much. I'm just gonna go straight and deep into it. Today we are going to be tackling the concept of identity and identity crisis. So to anyone who hasn't seen my previous episode, the previous episode was about existentialism and an existential crisis. So one of the things that I received in terms of feedback was the idea that a stance has already been taken and it's either you are for it or you are against it. Now, when I really looked into this idea, I was able to kind of to make two assessments really, right? To notice firstly that human beings are said to belong to various schools of thought. So when a child is born, they are indoctrinated into a certain school of thought, and this is something we grow up believing and understanding to be true, right? But the other thing that we are taught is to accept that as truth without interrogating the validity of the ideas in that school of thought. And as a result, I find myself asking the question, why do people refuse to interrogate social norms? So, but before I go to that, I'm just going to make a quick example in terms of what I mean when I say people accept social norms and accept dogmas and ideas without interrogating them in society. So, for example, you'd find that people who follow tradition oftentimes tend to argue that it is, when you ask them why do you believe in a certain tradition, they will say to you, it's been our tradition and it's been practiced for a very long time, therefore it makes it valid. When somebody is religious, they would tell you something like there is a god or a deity or divinity that commands that we believe something like that, and it settles it. But I tend to find that the whole idea that because God said so, then it settles it, or it's our tradition and we can't question it, we can't interrogate its validity, lacks the intellectual gymnastics that ought to be done for us to be able to understand the things that we believe in, the things that we subscribe to, and the things that we actually impose on other people. So I have about 3 ideas as to why really people in actual fact tend to accept ideas without interrogating them. The first one is the way in which these ideas are presented. So when social norms are presented, especially dogmatic social norms, right? These ideas, they're presented to us with a background that rejects alternative opinions. So, for example, the Christian God would say, I am the only God, and you should not worship statues and any other god and all of that, nullifying and disqualifying any other possibility to believe in an alternative god. Secondly, people of tradition tend to argue that this is not true. So essentially, the basis of believing in certain and specific social norms is set on rejecting anything that is alternative. So essentially, when you begin to question that as a person who forms part of that particular religious or cultural group, it's like you are isolating yourself from people who are supposed to be your own people. The second idea is that it's just easier to accept than to interrogate. And what do I mean by this? Think about it. It's really easy to just accept something is true rather than to interrogate, because when you interrogate something, you find yourself having to question whether or not your own beliefs. You find yourself having to question things that you were raised to believe in, having to question people that you sometimes even respect. And thirdly, it's just this whole idea of the fear of isolation. And here's the thing. Now, because these ideas are believed in by a group of people, he who dares to question whether or not if this is true or if this is valid or if it makes critical sense tends to suffer isolation, because it seems as if they do not have enough faith, right? In the tradition, they don't have enough faith in the dogma, they don't have enough faith in the teaching. So yeah, those are the three ideas that I tend to think that really we refuse the intellectual gymnastics to question and to interrogate ideas based on that. So what do I have to say to this whole thing that a stance has already been taken? It's either you are for or against it. I don't think it's true. I don't think when a stance is taken, it's either I'm for or against it. In actual fact, it's either I understand or don't understand it, right? Whether I'm for or against it is secondary to understanding it for me. Because if I don't understand something, being for it is kind of meaningless, because I don't even know what I say and claim that I am for. But anyway, without any waste of time and without moving far away from this conversation, I'm going to go into the conversation of the day. But before I do that, what I want you to do is just use your imagination for a moment, right? And when you do use your imagination, think about this. Society raises you into certain normativity. And this normativity has been taught to you as the truth, as fact, as valid. It's the be-all and end-all of knowledge that you have known. Now, imagine growing up understanding this to be truth, and then you discover that your reality, as you grow up and you begin to become more and more of yourself, does not align to the social norms that you have been taught and learned over time. This tends to put you in a position of isolation, and it kind of positions the conversation that I'm trying to have today. Because if a human being is going to find that everything that they have known to be true is opposite to what they seem to be becoming, it can cause them an identity crisis, right? So for us to be able to actually engage this conversation, I think we are going to need to sort of just explore this idea of identity and what identity is and how it works, right? Now, the nice thing about this is that it actually builds right from every idea that I raised when I spoke about existentialism. Identity essentially is the fact of being who you are. You would remember in the previous episode what I said is that human beings do become who they are meant to become. The only thing that existentially changes is the circumstances under which they are able to become themselves. So if you believe that human beings always become what they are meant to become, we ought to want to think about the extent to which we can, and society allows us to live to our fullest identity and to actualize, and what can be, and this really can actually be altered by circumstances that are curated by society. And what do I mean by this? Some of these circumstances is through dogma that we are taught by society, or it's through the actual physical actions of society and the things they say and the discrimination that we get to experience. It tends to alter how we how we self-actualize and we perform to the fullest of our own identity. The crisis of coming to terms with who one really is and whether and what their place is in society stems exactly from what I've just spoken about, right? And in terms of a queer identity crisis, the uniqueness of it is the fact that people have to reconcile that over and above just consistently having to discover who you are, you also have to discover that society does not necessarily accept, society does not necessarily understand, and society in actual fact actively rejects the identity that you yourself accept to be an identity that is one that is true to you. So this topic really is, I'm going to divide it into two, which the first one is going to be just to explore identity crisis as a general concept. And after that, then I'm going to explore a queer identity crisis because I think there's a uniqueness that is attached to an identity crisis that is experienced by queer people. There's an extra layer to be explored there. But anyway, without messing up the flow, what exactly is an identity crisis? So, based on the explanation of identity being the fact of becoming who you really are, an identity crisis is a period of uncertainty and a period of confusion about one's self, about what exactly one's place and true purpose in life is. Oftentimes when people are experiencing an identity crisis, they are questioning their past choices, or sometimes they are questioning their place in the future of the society that they are living in. So, and where, at what phases of your life does an identity crisis seem to outplay itself? It seems to generally outplay itself at life-changing transitions, predominantly at adolescence and at when one is having a midlife crisis. But really what that is a midlife identity crisis. Really, this whole concept of a midlife identity crisis, or rather a midlife crisis, was really an identity crisis, because this is, and here's the thing, this is just me really trying to think and imagine it, because I have not necessarily, I think I'm a bit young to have gone through something like this, so I'm not necessarily speaking from experience, but just from an assessment point of view. Correct me if I'm wrong. What I think about a midlife identity crisis is people begin to question their purpose in life at that point. And that's the one time where people's meaning to life is tested, because you've lived long enough to be able to question whether or not this life that you have lived, for this period of time that you have lived, is worth living, whether or not, if it's got a meaning, and what is the criteria for a life that has meaning. But more so, then you question what next, what do you do next, how do you make it better, how do you make yourself better. And as a result, people begin to have a midlife identity crisis, because they tend to begin to question who they really are and who they want to be, who they want to identify as going forward. And we've already said, an identity crisis always outplays itself when there's a life-changing transition that happens. And it's not only about growing up, really. Sometimes it's about discovering something new about yourself. So, for example, somebody will discover that maybe their father is alive when they, for a very long time, thought that they don't have a dad, right? And then they discover that the father's alive. Now you have to interrogate whether or not, how do you move forward with the knowledge that your father is alive? When you discover that actually society has taught you to be in love with women, but really you are romantically interested in men. So yes, exactly, that's where an identity crisis begins to step in. And where does this come from? This comes from the fact that society has norms, cultures, and traditions that have been set to guide the standard that a human being has to pit themselves against. And what does this mean? So we set a standard to say, okay, cool, you're going to be young and you're going to grow up, and then you're going to go to school and then university, get a job and that pays well, and get married, have children, have a family, be successful, and buy a house, buy a car, and retire comfortably. And this is the standard of life. Now, these standards that are created by milestones that are placed by the world and on us, they tend to create an expectation which we as human beings go forward to internalize, right? So for example, I just want to do like a quick timeline example of what a human life looks like. You are born, and after being born, then you grow to become a toddler. When you become a toddler, your parents begin to have an identity crisis because, one, this is the time when you're supposed to go to preschool, and they wonder whether or not if you'll be able to fit in with the other kids and you're not going to get bullied and stuff like that. But secondly, will you be able to express yourself in terms of speaking, particularly if you have to speak a language that is not used at home? Thirdly, we speak about things like learning how to walk. We tend to see parents worry the most whenever, like, they're worried about when is my child going to start walking, and they're having an identity crisis. Is it possible that my child could be disabled, and all of that and all of those things? And sometimes they even struggle to accept when the child has limited capabilities in terms of walking and talking and all of these things, because there's an expectation that at a certain age, a child has to be able to walk and talk and do certain things and to be able to assimilate with other toddlers of their age. The second part of your life then is, so you grow and you become a child. After being a toddler, then you become a teenager, right? So from there, it's that period between primary and high school. Here, a human being begins to shape their hopes, dreams, and ideas about themselves. And that's where they begin to identify really who they want to identify as, one, but more than that, who they really are at that point. And so these things sometimes happen outside of the standard that is set for them, and they have to find themselves questioning whether or not if there is a correlation between what they desire to identify as and what they are meant to be, who they are meant to be, versus the society's standards and the society's beliefs. And then from there, you move quickly to being a young adult. When you are a teenager, people allow you to, like, are a bit lenient in terms of exploring, but they still have expectations of you. But then you become a young adult. Now, when you become a young adult, right, there is an expectation that you're going to have a career. Maybe you are preparing to get married and you are starting a family, you're going to have a child, a husband or a wife, and all of these things that young adults are expected to do based on social standards. And then you become an adult, right? At this point, you are expected to be settled in life, right? So, for example, it's to say you are supposed to have all your things sorted out in life, and don't be a person who likes to party and appreciate more certain things than other things. So, for example, don't go, instead of going to parties, go to church. Instead of being more creative in terms of the things that you believe in, and in terms of, instead of being inquisitive, become more of a believer. Now, all these transitions are coupled with two things. One, they happen periodically, and as they happen, they cause a certain nervous condition, and this nervous condition is caused by a conflict between reality and expectation. That expectation from society and expectation that you have internalized. As a result, it has become your own expectation of yourself. What sets a queer identity crisis apart, and what makes queer identity crisis unique, is the fact that now your own reality is not only the fact that you're not only battling with the fact with discovering yourself in a place that has got expectations of you, but you also find yourself having to discover yourself in a world that rejects everything that you keep on discovering about yourself. So who you are and who what society expects you to be stands in conflict and results in a nervous condition. And this can tend to become a perpetual nervous condition, because when you consistently try to find your place in the world and decide whether or not if you're going to abandon all the social norms that you have internalized and learned over time, you can suffer a whole lot of isolation. As a result, you have an identity crisis that is unique to queer people. More than the normal development standards result in queer people trying to find themselves in a world that rejects them. So the result is questions and confusion about the legitimacy of their own identity. You find that when society consistently rejects who you feel you should be and who you understand yourself to be, then you question the legitimacy of your own existence and whether or not if you have a place in this world. This is coupled with a society that actively makes it hard for you to even discover yourself, let alone to exist. And they do this through things like bullying. They do this through criminalizing your existence, through violence, and through killing of other queer people. The result of all of this is gay people staying in the closet and not necessarily actualizing in the public. But the second thing is choosing communities that are very far from communities that know them. So, for example, if I am born in the Northwest, I would choose to go live in Gauteng because that's a community that I do not owe any allegiance to and I don't seek to even belong to. They didn't teach me anything, so I haven't internalized anything from them. So I believe I can start afresh from that community. Thirdly, it's things like gender dysphoria. Now, why is this conversation a very important one? One, a queer identity crisis contributes to a huge deal of suicide within the community because of the mental health that results from that identity crisis. But secondly, also death, because a lot of people are being killed just for being queer. But and also a feeling of being disconnected. You can imagine having to exist your entire life disconnected from from society, because this society that you live in actually rejects you. But fourthly, there's also a whole lot of hate that brews in a generation of gay people who grow up in a society that rejects them. This can cause huge mental health issues such as depression and anxiety. They subsequently don't function optimally, given the fact that, one, these are people they have to live with. And I mean, the people who rejected them are people they have to live with. But secondly, and these are your friends, these are their friends, these are people they grew up with, these are their families, these are their colleagues. So The only point that I can make is if you care about humanity really, you also care about the mental health of even the people you don't agree with who they are and who they think they are, especially if it doesn't affect you. And that's literally a conclusion that I'm going to make. Beyond this, I would like to hear what other people have to say. Again, I'm going to repeat, this is Gays, Freedom and the Right to Exist. My name is Mosima Nehape. Please like, share, subscribe, and share with your friends and family. Interact with me on the comment section. Danko.